the calculus, I'm like, I'm going to get home a lot later and I'm hungry and I'm not going to have time to practice. So, speaking of, I go off reserves and just start talking crazy, just come over and take me shit. Right.
Morning. My name is Gabe Teninbaum. I'm a professor of legal writing at Suffolk University Law School, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about spaced repetition technology for legal education. So let me start off by asking a question. Let's say that you were researching how to best do well on law school exams, or for that matter, how to best prepare for the bar exam. And in your research, let's imagine that you discovered that there is a technique that allows you to remember more than 3 times as much information as other techniques you might use to study. Now imagine that that technique takes less than half the time. Now imagine that hundreds of studies have already established that this technique works to the tune of improving test results by half a standard deviation or more. Imagine it's not a fly-by-night technique, that it's been discovered for more than 100 years, it's been suggested in theory as something that should be used since 1932, that it's more recently been called by the APA the single best method of study that there is. Imagine that it's got references in Time Magazine, Harvard Business Review, and the New York Times as something that's promising that we should use. Imagine that medical educators have started to use this and it's shown significant improvements in students' abilities to prepare for the medical boards, to succeed in internships, and actually to make better clinical decisions when they're in practice. What you've discovered is spaced repetition technology. I didn't discover it. All I did was read an article in Wired magazine a few years ago about a very eccentric Polish mathematician named Peter Wozniak, and I probably irresponsibly challenged one of my research assistants to study for the bar using this technique. And he did it. And he called me up and he said, Gabe, everyone has to use that technique. And the next year, my research assistant, a brilliant woman who herself would have passed the bar probably without studying at all, wanted to try the technique. So I said, try it in property class. Just limit it to 1 class. Try it. So I set her up and let her try spaced repetition. And over the course of the year, she used it. She used it the way it should be used. And unfortunately for her, about 3 weeks before her final exam, she had a family emergency. She's an adult student. She had several kids at home. There was an issue with one of their health. She just couldn't pay attention to schoolwork. Other priorities came first. So she put down her property books, but she'd been using it over the course of the year to study and to learn the information. So she said, what should I do? I said, well, call the dean of students. Tell him you can't take the exam. She says, no, I think I'm pretty prepared. I said, I don't know that that's a good idea. It's your education, though. Do what you want. She called me the day after the test, and she said, I have never been so sure in my life that I got an A. Not only did she get an A, she won the Jurisprudence Award for a section. That's the single top grade in a section at Suffolk University Law School. This technique has been proven up and down in other fields. And what I want to do is show you why I think it applies to legal education and the practice of law. Today what I want to do is I want to explain a little bit of the science of how this works. and I want to invite you to participate in trying this out. Now, the interest that I have at heart is students in the bar exam. I have a lot of problems with the bar exam. I don't like how it's administered. I don't like the kind of questions it asks. I don't like the idea that there's some sort of gatekeeping feature that students have to, after spending 3 years and 100 grand to achieve, have to now buy some silly course for $4,000 more. I don't like that. I find that offensive and dumb. So what I've done is I've started to think about, well, how can we use this technique to at least make bar prep courses less onerous, to make life for our students a little bit easier in terms of transitioning from law school to legal education. Here's my hypothesis. I can't yet prove it. I think I'll soon be able to prove it. I think that if all law students use spaced repetition, about half of the students who fail will pass. Not all of them. I don't suggest that all students can be saved using just this technique. Maybe this technique in combination with others. But I hypothesize about half of the students who do this will pass the bar as a result. Here's why. Several years ago, a scientist named Cepeda and colleagues did a meta-analysis of every piece of spaced repetition research that's ever been done in the modern era, since 1940 or something like that. And what they found was, under the right conditions, grades went up in testing conditions by half a standard deviation. What that means is, if you use this technique just for the MBE, your grade on the MBE alone goes up by about 8 points. Okay? So what I did was I went back and I mapped it on the data that I had from my university, because they had redacted the names, but I know who passed and failed and what their scores looked like. And about half of them would have passed if they had 8 more points. And I'm confident that that can be the case with all of our students and all the people that we deal with. Okay? So enough telling you why it's really cool. Let me explain a little bit about how it works. Okay? I want to talk about 3 interlocking scientific principles. The first is called the forgetting curve. There was an eccentric German psychiatrist named Hermann Ebbinghaus, and he studied memory. And one of the things that Ebbinghaus was very, very interested in learning was how people forget and how quickly information decays from memory. Incidentally, in 2014, we're still not quite sure how these processes work, but in 1895, Ebbinghaus was really interested in it. So he used himself as a test subject. And what he did was he started memorizing thousands and thousands and thousands of nonsense syllables. Consonant, vowel, consonant, cuff, daff, right? And he'd memorize them in lists. And then he'd test himself on that list. And what he found was that at any given time, after he had stopped studying, he could predict what proportion of that list he'd be able to remember. Everyone hear me on that? Right? He knew at all times, oh, there's about a 65% probability that I'll be able to list out all of these nonsense syllables that I've just memorized. So then he started having his lab assistants do these same silly experiments. And he found that while their forgetting curves differed from his just a little bit, their forgetting curves were also very, very predictable. Okay? So the science of the forgetting curve, which is what Ebbinghaus discovered in 1895, is the idea that right when you stop learning information, right when you stop studying, it begins to decay from memory. And the most important thing to take home is it decays at a very predictable rate. Now, that rate may differ from person to person. It may differ from topic to topic. Okay? But in any given person, in any given domain of knowledge, it's predictable when you'll forget information. So now you start to see how this works, right? What we do is we get a little bit of data about our users. We use a very sophisticated algorithm I'll talk about later. Okay? And then what we do is, right before a student would forget a series of pieces of information he or she had learned, we cue them to study again. Right? Because by knowing their forgetting curve, we know when they're going to forget. We know to a scientific certainty. It's not theory, it's reality. Right? So it's remarkable how quickly we forget information. Ebbinghaus found that in his landmark study, if you memorize a series of pieces of information for the first time, at 20 minutes, you only remember about 6 out of 10, actually less than 6 out of 10. But then it gets really scary. At a day, you only remember about a third of what you studied. Imagine how important that is for students. You go to property class all semester, you cram at the end of the semester, you spend that whole day before the exam studying, you go into the exam, you remember 33%. I'm going to map forward a little bit. I can get our students to 92%. Okay, I can get them to 92%. This has real-world applications. The reason it has real-world applications is because what will happen with our students who study at the right pace is they won't have this curve that allows them to just forget over the semester. They'll always remember at 92%. And not just for the time that they're in the course, as long as they continue to use spaced repetition. They'll remember it when it's time for the bar exam. Right? This is the forgetting curve. Now let me tell you about the next effect that makes it so it's actually efficient to use spaced repetition. The spacing effect. I clipped this from Wired. I probably should have put an attribution there, so I'll put it on audio. It's from Wired magazine. The spacing effect is the principle that as you continue to do repetitions of study at exactly the right time, your forgetting curve flattens. You forget at a slower rate. It makes sense, right? If you remind yourself about something several times, you'll forget about it slower and slower and slower, right? But the really amazing thing about the spacing effect is that it expands exponentially. It expands exponentially. So in theory, if you had a student and you wanted to have that student memorize all of the relevant UCC sections, you could set them to study using a spaced repetition algorithm, okay? And what would happen is they would be cued to study it again a day later. And then they'd give their answer. And then depending on how well they knew the answer, more on that later, they would be cued to study it again. And the time between the first and second repetition would be shorter than the time between the second and third repetition. Would be shorter than between the third and fourth repetition. But the amazing part is, it doesn't just expand a little bit, it expands exponentially, right? So if you have a student who's willing to put in a few minutes a day on days 1, 2, 5, 12, and 20, after day 20, the next repetition might be day 100. And the next repetition after that might be day 400. So imagine the student who on week 2 of law school learns the elements of negligence and all the niceties of proximate cause and these difficult concepts. If you do a little upfront work, which you're going to have to do for the exam anyway, it's essentially locked in your memory with very rare reminders through the bar exam and beyond. Right? Remarkable. Now, there's one other part that I'll talk about just briefly now, but you'll see it on display. One other reason that spaced repetition is highly effective is because of the testing effect. There are 3 major things that make spaced repetition effective. 1 is knowledge of the forgetting curve, 2 is the existence of the spacing effect, and 3 is the testing effect. So, people understand information better and retain it better if they're tested on it, rather than just sort of passively taking it in. And we all intuitively know that, but it's been proven time and again, and there's several studies out there that say things like, a student who passively takes in information and tests themselves on it will score on average a standard deviation and a half better than those who do not, right? So what spaced repetition allows users to do when harnessed properly isn't just take advantage of the forgetting curve and the spacing effect, but also take advantage of the testing effect by consistently reminding themselves of information they want to cue themselves about, and then from there, testing what's in their memory on it. Now, let's talk a little bit about how spaced repetition has been used so far. From 1895 to the late 1960s, spaced repetition was proven time and again, but it was only proven in lab experiments. And the reason for that is because to take advantage of the spacing effect, you need to have someone who cues the study subject at exactly the right time. So the problem is, if you want someone to learn, say, French vocabulary, and you want them to take advantage of what spaced repetition has to offer, you need to be willing to say, you need to study those verbs again. You need to study those verbs again. You need to study those verbs again at exactly the right time. Because if you have them study too early, it's a whole bunch of wasted effort. If you have them study too late, they've already lost the information and they have to relearn it. So in the lab setting, this was rather difficult to do. Or rather, it was rather easy to do, but it was rather difficult to do outside of the lab setting. In the 60s and 70s, a couple of folks came along and they tried different techniques. Has anyone ever tried to learn a foreign language using the Pimsleur approach? It's an audio learning thing. My high school had a language lab and they had some tape somewhere in the back that I never used, but the idea is you learn words and then from there, there's a beep and then you listen to the word again and repeat it, and then there's a beep, like 5 seconds and 25 seconds and 2 minutes, and it's sort of a rudimentary version of spaced repetition that doesn't work very effectively unless you are really willing to sit in that language lab. So along came this fellow named Peter Wozniak. He's a Polish gentleman who did his PhD dissertation in memorization and memory decay. He's remarkably eccentric. He lives his entire life on a spaced repetition algorithm. And he does things like reads books in chunks so that he can retain the most information from it. He doesn't own a telephone. He doesn't go to conferences. He doesn't present papers at conferences. He does answer emails sometimes, but you go in a spaced repetition queue in terms of when he'll actually respond to you. So when I wrote him about 2 years ago, I still haven't gotten a response. I hope to someday. But Wozniak created something called SuperMemo. And SuperMemo has a wonderful website. And SuperMemo is the first system that harnesses computers to do spaced repetition. Now we're talking. Spaced repetition belongs on computers because we have such easy access to technology that can cue us at exactly the right moment and can retain information. So Wozniak created this product called SuperMemo. And SuperMemo has been used by thousands and thousands of users, mostly for foreign language learning. And what Wozniak has done over time is he said, look, I just want to do the research. I'm not interested in creating a project. Do with it what you want. And a few different people have taken his algorithms, which he gives away free of charge, they're freeware, and inserted it into their own software packages. So Anki, A-N-K-I, is a really good example of a spaced repetition program. Memrise is a new, very highly funded spaced repetition program, which I have some misgivings about, but I really like the design. And then we at Suffolk have created our own spaced repetition platform called Serious Spaced Repetition Systems, which I'll show you in just a few minutes so that you can see how it works. The idea of these platforms, right, is to give them to students. To give them to students and to either create flashcards for them, create flashcards with them, or to show them how to create flashcards themselves. So let me just show you what we created and then go through why we think it works and to invite everyone to participate. So, spacedrepetition.com is our website, okay? Now I'm going to back up and I'm going to talk you through how this website works, and I'm going to try to link it in with the principles that I've mentioned in terms of the forgetting curve and the spacing effect, and show you how we think this can work. Users go on the website, spacedrepetition.com. Incidentally, it's free. At some point there'll probably be some modest subscription fee. There's none now, so feel free to create an account and try it yourself if you want. And what they do is they have the opportunity to study. And you might ask, what are you studying? Well, they can study any kind of content they want. We just want to make the platform available to them. We have content that we give our students because we're law professors and we're legal educators. So what we did was we decided, well, the challenge that's most important for us, for our students that we want to harness spaced repetition for, is helping them to pass the bar exam. You guys probably know this, but students in 49 or maybe all 50 of the states have to take the multi-state bar exam on those 6 arcane topics that everyone learns during their first year of law school. And the National Conference of Bar Examiners who give the bar exam publish the list of topics that they test on, right? They say, we're going to test within the area of con law, and here are the 10 subtopics that we're going to test within con law. And they do something very interesting. They say, and within those 10 subtopics, here's how we weight the frequency of questions. And if you game that, what you can find is that by studying a very, very small fraction of the topic areas that the National Conference reserves the right to test on, you can get an incredible amount of content, right? For example, under the torts topic, the National Conference of Bar Examiners who write the MBE exam say, we reserve the right to test on these 5 subtopics. Intentional tort, negligence, things of that nature. But 60% of our questions come from the negligence field. Well, that makes it easy when you're trying to create a spaced repetition system for students. Because rather than overwhelming them with every single flashcard on every single conceivable question, there'd be tens of thousands, you can just have them play Moneyball, right? You say, by just covering a quarter of the material, we can give you 60% of the points that you'll ever face, okay? So what we did was we said we're going to create a core set. We're going to give it to every single law student who wants to use it. Right now there are 635 cards or something like that in the core set, which is about the outer limit of where we want to be in terms of cognitive load on students. Now, students also in this system have the option to create any card they want for any course they want, to do it themselves or to do it collaboratively, to invite their professors along. We will curate just the core set, meaning that which is tested on the MBE, that content's going to be great. It's going to be created by law professors. It's going to be vetted by law professors who specialize in the topic that's tested. A tort professor is going to help write the card for torts. A con law professor is going to help write the card for con law. And students beyond that can create any card they want for any course they want. And in the system that we've created, I'll show you how users are able to share cards and build up sort of a crowdsourced database of spaced repetition material so they can stop buying canned briefs, they can stop going to the bookstores and buying all these $80 books that they don't need and can't sell back. They can just work with each other to create a system that not only is cheaper, but is far more effective. So let me run you through it real quick, okay? First, when you're in spacedrepetition.com, everyone gets the core deck. You can subscribe to others that have been created or create your own. But when you want to start, you just click Start Now. Study Now. So there's your first question. Imagine that as the front of a physical flashcard. How can a witness be impeached for bias/interest? I have no idea. Does anyone remember? Shame on all of us. Okay? That's okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to click View Answer. After we've racked our brains, we click View Answer. And look what happens. We get the back of an electronic flashcard, right? We get the back of an electronic flashcard, and it tells us the court will allow proof that the witness is biased. The witness may be shown to be biased in favor of a party or biased against a party. Okay. So now what we do is we have to decide how well did we know the answer to that question. Even after seeing the answer, I didn't know it very well. So I'm going to put 0. You know what happens? The algorithm takes over. It's just scheduled the next time I need to see that card to learn it better. That's it. Okay? So my whole role in this process is just to look at the flashcards and be honest about how well I know it. As long as I do those two things, I will get to 92%. And I'll do it in just a few minutes a day. Right? What we need people to do is to do about 10 new cards a day, right? I have all the analytics for the website. The average user who does their work, we have well over 1,000 users so far. The average user who does their work spends about 4 minutes a day on the site. And that's all they need, okay? That's all they need. So it brings us to the next card. What is an ex post facto law? Anyone know? Come.
Oh, an ex post facto law is a law that's made illegal after something's made illegal after you've done it, or it applies and is enacted after the thing has been done. It has both civil and criminal analogs.
That's pretty good. Here's the answer that the profs came up with, right? So here's what you'd need to do. You would test that internal answer that you gave before you looked at the answer against what's written there. And you'd read it over, you'd think about the differences, and then when you were satisfied, you'd rate yourself. And again, it's a scale of 0 to 5. Knew it worse or knew it better. And if you forget how that works, there's a little key down the bottom that says 5 is nailed it, correct answer, some hesitation, etc., all the way down to blackout. Okay? All you have to do is evaluate yourself honestly. It will get you to 92%. Now, let's say that your course isn't one of the courses that's tested on the MBE, and you want to study with friends, right? Or you just want to, environmental law. You're going to be tested on it. You want to be an environmental law lawyer someday. You need to remember these basic concepts. In this system, what you can do is you can create cards of your own, right? You can create a new custom stack. And you just say what school you go to, what the course is, who the professor is, and who it is writing the stack. And that's going to become important in a moment, because one of the things I want to encourage is crowdsourcing of these cards. Because what you can next do is you can see what other people at your institution are doing. So here's a student from University of Florida who's taking corporations with Professor Johnson, and her name is Yanel Cantelar. You're on TV, Yanel. So if we click all the way through that, there's her set of cards. Oh, I'm in corporations class at University of Florida, and she's made this set public. I want it too. Okay, just add it to my set. So now, in addition to the core MBE cards, which you can study at any point, either during the first year or as you get ready for the bar exam, you can add yourself into other sets of cards. You can also see what other people at your school are doing. Here's some other users from Suffolk University Law School. Oh, I know Micah. He sits across from me in con law. Let me see what sets he's added. I click on his name. It tells me what sets he's added, and then I can add myself into his. Now, there are more sophisticated sort of things that we're building in. Actually, currently built into it now is a way to use a Reddit-style upvote, downvote, so that when you're creating decks collaboratively, you can have some quality control over the cards. One of the things aspirationally I'd like to do is to have students from a given class all sort of come to an agreement, hey, we'll just divide up the syllabus and I'll do 3 cards tonight, you do 3 cards tomorrow, and we'll pool them. But the concern I have is that really weak students, even if they're acting in good faith, might create really bad cards. So one of the things that we built into this system was a way that users can look at other people's cards and comment on them. And if 5 users in the group say, I think this alternative version of that card would be better, the set replaces the alternative version with the original version. And there are other things that we're building into it to allow people to have remarkable flexibility so that they can build exactly the tool that they want for their classes. So that's the product. It's called spacedrepetition.com. It's called Serious SRS Spaced Repetition Systems. And like I said, for now, it's free for all of our students. It'll certainly remain free for some time. And at some point, if we do charge for it, we're talking, a few bucks a month to try to just keep things alive. But that's the name of the game here. So now maybe it's best if I stop talking and ask if people have questions or comments or advice or feedback. This is sort of the debut of Sirius, so if people have tips, I'd love to hear them also. Please.
When you start to charge or start looking at charging, will you be offering an IP access subscription for an institution?
Yeah, sure.
That would be great.
yeah. Have your dean call me.
Okay.
Or if you're the dean, come see me.
No, but I'm the collections person, so I'm...
Yeah, so one of the things we'd like to do is we'd like to get whole institutions involved, because one of the frustrations that I had when I was a law student is, when I was on a law journal, maybe some of you were on law journals, one of the really cool advantages I had was a physical file of really good class notes and things like that for students. And again, I certainly enjoyed having people who came before me who got good grades passing along their class notes and outlines and flashcards and things like that. But I later felt a little bad, because it's like, well, I'm a pretty good student and I have all these extra advantages that other students don't have. That's bull. Why can't we just democratize that and give everyone that same advantage of having the best content? So one of the things that's really attractive about doing institutional things is, you just give it to every student.
Yeah.
And the institution's only marching orders, just get them to use it. And you know, what I've devised is there's a quick start guide to group creation of sets of cards so that students not just taking the first year courses and not just taking the bar can really use it effectively. So yeah, please.
Okay, two questions, sort of related. One, so if the answers on the card are wrong,
You got a problem.
as the answer was for the ex post facto, then, yeah, so is the idea that students create their own answers?
So on the core cards, professors create those cards. Okay, those are the ones that we went through. The cards created by students, students can create their own cards. Professors can always come in and participate too. And actually we have it set up so that when a professor comments, their font color is red as opposed to black. So you can see, oh, this is the professor correcting this. But the short answer is the core cards are curated, meaning experts create them and vet them. The student created cards are student created. So that the way to improve those is to get as many eyes as possible on them. And it's sort of the Wikipedia phenomenon. You know, at some point in its existence, Wikipedia became more accurate than Encyclopedia Britannica. Until that time, in some places it was great, in some places it was clunky. What we want to do is we want to move to a mass of people constantly correcting and improving cards. And that's how we'll do quality control on the non-curated cards. On the curated cards, they should all be right.
Okay. The other question, and I should give everybody a warning, I am what was derogatorily referred to in previous sessions as doctrinal faculty.
Yeah, great.
Although I don't really do doctrine. If this started from memorizing nonsense syllables, I mean, so that's memory.
Yep.
And not even the multi-state will ask you, how do you impeach a witness for bias?
Yeah, you're right.
It's the other way. So everything I'm actually teaching in class comes with instructions. Do not memorize unless memorization, and I'm sure you got this question before.
I think it's maybe the most important question there is. Yeah.
Yeah. So how robust is this, and how do you identify time sequence, because I am a huge believer in repetition, for what in fact is what I'm trying to do for my students, which is not have them memorize, but in fact go back and redo the analytic process that got you to the ability to say, well, that's what an ex post facto law is, but the answer is wrong because it's saying that the government is prohibited, and there's nothing about an ex post facto law. It's the Constitution that suggests the government cannot do that, and that's part of a whole core of things, including due process.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so,
that's
fantastic. So let me, I'm going to try to unpack it and make sure I get to it, and tell me if I don't get to all of it, but I think I can. So the first part is that the system is designed in terms of time spacing thought process, so you can shut certain parts on or off. So if you're an evidence professor and you're just doing hearsay now, you can shut off everything but hearsay, or you can shut off, you know, specific parts of hearsay and non-hearsay. So you can turn things on and off as needed, as appropriate for your class. Okay, that's the easy question to ask. The hard question is, does memorization really matter for lawyers? There's a fascinating study. Yes, it does. There's a fascinating study out there about baseball box scores. Has anyone ever read that study?
Yeah.
Right. The way it worked was they asked a series of people to explain what happened in a baseball game using box scores. Right. And what they discovered was the people who had an interest and knew something previously about baseball could much more readily remember what happened in a game. And the idea was that because people had some basic baseline understanding of the rules of baseball, as opposed to someone who had never heard of baseball and was just trying to repeat willy-nilly facts that they'd heard, the people with that memorized baseline are able to do analysis at a much higher level. And this has been proven several times in spaced repetition studies a lot of them involving artwork of all things. And they ask people to identify certain pieces of art and match them up with a certain author or artist. And then what they see is, can they subsequently do better at recognizing other pieces of art by that author, artist, which aren't things that they've studied? And the short answer is yes, they can. So the long-term concern with memorization is that it somehow harms people's ability to make inferences outside of those memorizations. Turns out that that's not factually true. Now, this has not been studied yet in the law domain. It hasn't been, okay? This is still a theory. I think it's a strongly supported theory. But at the end of the day, what we know is that spaced repetition allows people to remember facts, black letter law, and it aids their ability to make inferences. Now, the one thing that it doesn't necessarily directly enable people to do is to make wise judgments about how to apply those inferences. That's where professors come in. So if you could have a classroom full of students who walked in on day one knowing every element to every cause of action, that wouldn't mean that they were ready to be lawyers. It would mean that they were students who are ready to have a higher level conversation earlier on because they had a better basis to do actual analysis of the information. So that's my thought on it. It'll prove out over time. Anecdotally, yeah, it works great. I want to do it empirically because I want to do it in a meaningful way. I'm confident that it'll directly work, but I can't say what the numbers haven't established one way or another yet. Good? I get it all? Yeah.
So the cards that are available on the website did the multi-state people feed them to you guys, or are they all cost? I guess my question is there some organization that provides some of the cards, or are they all developed by either a professor or the students?
Yes, the second one.
Okay.
So we use the MBE's outline,
okay.
That says, you know, it's 5 pages long. It says, here are the topics we test on the MBE, including subtopics and subtopics. And then we went back and with colleagues, we said, okay, let's divide this up. Let's figure out, you know, we want to test the over-tested things, right? We want to teach the over-tested things. Let's, among each other, figure out how to divvy that up. And we created and embedded the cards ourselves.
And so the second question is, for specific states that are, of course, all of our essays are different.
Yeah.
Are there any states that are working with the website to possibly do flashcards for essay questions?
No, although, you know, although it would be welcome. I mean,
yeah.
You know, the idea is to make a repository that all students can take advantage of.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's easy to do the MBE for the obvious reasons. It's hard to do state essays.
Yeah.
So the sort of stage one of this project is to give people the MBE and improve upon it because it, you know, we're in beta. It'll require there are glitches, there are errors, you know, and then from there to build it out so that there is ultimately a repository of state-specific essay tested information. And whether that's created by students or created in conjunction with the state bar examiners, which would be optimal, you know, either would be wonderful. We just want to be a resource. We want students to just stop buying study aids. I want to kill them. I mean, I want to destroy them.
Well, it's crazy how much those boxes cost. I mean, it's just
it is offensive how much they cost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I'm open about it. I want to knock them out of business. Please.
When you say, so let's say someone in a class in another university wanted to create their own cards, a student. Yeah. And is the options public, meaning everybody in the world can see them who logs on an account, or can you lock it down to just that class?
So as we speak at this moment, the options are public or private. One of the things that we've gotten for feedback during beta is I'd like to be able to share this with just specific people. And, you know, I think there's a little law student psychology, and I very nicely when a student will email me from another school, I don't know these students, so they, you know, they owe me nothing. I'll say, you know, I'm happy to think about it, but why? And the inclination I get is that they don't want everyone in their evidence section to know it because they're happy for their 3 friends to get A's with them, but they don't want everyone to. So, you know, it makes me feel a little bad because I don't think law school should be that way, but I want to accept reality for reality. So what we're building in is an invitation process. so that a student who creates a deck can say, okay, I'm going to invite person A, B, and C to participate, and it'll be a closed community as to A, B, and C. Now, what I'd like to do as we do that is kind of have a sundown provision on it, so that when that student and that small group is done with that class, their cards can become part of the community. Because, you know, I understand if they want to lock it down for selfish reasons while they're in the class, but, you know, who does it really harm when they're gone? And it would help the next iteration.
I was thinking more like they're just preserving their own anonymity as a student. Like if your only choice is to public as in every, you know, thousands of people seeing them taking this class, you know, that kind of, I don't know whether it would be an issue, but.
Interesting. I would say now, because I see the admin board, I would say there are 400 decks that have been created. I would say about half are public and about half are private.
Private being just me?
Just you.
Okay.
And like I said, sort of version 1.1 of this will allow for invitations to whoever you want.
Right.
But where we are now is it's, you know, it's binary. It's public or it's private, and we'd like to improve that. Because people want it. I mean, I don't necessarily love the reason for it, but they want it, so.
Yeah.
Please.
How precise does the timing of the repetition need to be? In your example, you said like 1 day, 3 day, 12 day.
Well, so one thing I didn't talk a lot about was the more precise the better, and we build in a little fat, and that's intentional. So one of the challenges that we have is we wanted to build this out as a web app so that users could use it from their PC or their Mac or their Droid or their iPhone. Like I have it, you know, I have a Sirius app on my iPhone. It looks like a regular app, but the problem is push notifications can't be done outside of native apps. You know, those things that pop up on the screen. So what we have to do is we send a daily reminder email if people haven't logged onto the system to do their cards that day. And people can opt out of it. Some people don't like that. Knowing that, we had to schedule in a little fat. So in the early days, I want people to use it exactly as scheduled. Day 90, day 300, day 1,000, which honestly might be the next repetition after that. If you're off a day or two, you're probably going to be okay. But in the early days, it's important. Interesting, I always try to hire RAs who are smarter than me, which isn't all that hard. And I have one guy who had done a postdoc in neurology. And I said, can you just explain the science to me? I mean, I don't really need to understand it, but like what's going on in people's brains? And he gave me about a half-hour lecture, and I was lost by minute 2. But what I understood, like the take-home from it was that, you know, your brain makes connections, and it's an actual physical connection. And if you wait too long, the connection voids, you know. So we build in a little fat because you're better off being slightly inefficient and studying a millisecond earlier than you would have had to, than a millisecond after it's lost, which is effectively starting again. Did that get to it? I feel like I rambled and got lost in answering.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm interested in the study as well. I mean, how do you keep track of that? How do you handle different issues? I mean, there's so many things that your brain has access to. A given day, I'm trying to keep track.
Well, there are people that are passionate about this, and particularly language learners. And there are some people that spend an hour of this on a day, a day, not just learning, you know, law, but learning languages or learning about the natural world or whatever. And people can memorize tens of thousands of facts over the course of their life. And actually, Joshua Foer, the writer, who's Jonathan Safran Foer's brother, who's himself, you know, Joshua's a brilliant guy, and he wrote a story about traveling to some far-flung place where there's an obscure language, and whether it was a tribal language in South America or something like that. And he used this system to learn enough language, maybe 800 or 1,000 words, to just get around. And it took him net about 22 hours. Now, he did those 22 hours over 3 or 4 months. But the reality is that you can learn just a remarkable amount of information as long as you're willing to put in a few minutes a day. And I don't know of people who have had difficulties because it becomes overwhelming as long as they're willing to just take a few steps every day. So I hope that answers it.
Okay, so I got a question.
Let me have it.
School, and because I do know some of the neuroscience behind it, one of the things that chronic anxiety does is it interferes with your ability to set in memory at that. So you're talking about taking, especially for first-year people, for those multi-state courses, you're talking about people who are in that state. No matter how much law school tries to do otherwise, and it doesn't try very hard in a lot of places. So this work, in spite of that, what does persistent anxiety do to this?
Yeah, I'm not aware of a study that specifically addresses persistent anxiety and spaced repetition. It's been studied in very, very interesting contexts, mostly involving aging people, because there's an idea of can you help people with, say, dementia recover some of the memories or retain some of the memories longer. And to a study, what they found is that doing spaced repetition versus the alternative is,
so there's always a gap. Okay.
Is a gap. Right, so actually, there's not always a gap. In physical activities, interestingly, there's not a gap. So if you were, say, a tennis player or a golfer, and you wanted to practice your swing, practicing your swing on a schedule of spaced repetition makes absolutely no difference. And actually, there are industrial reasons that they've tried to do that. There's a very, very funny study with chicken sexers. This is a thing. And they pick up the chicken skirt and they look and they say, because it's important if you got to know if you have a boy or a girl chicken in your, farm. And they have to act very, very quickly to get through all the chickens. And they've done spaced repetition studies to see if that sort of thing is improved, the movements and all that, if they can make them work faster. Turns out they can. So in some places there's not a gap. But in every intellectual context it's been tested in, it's a positive gap. Spaced repetition helps. Interestingly, spaced repetition has also been tested in non-human animals. Rats and sea sponges, who knew they had a brain? And it's worked across, or sea slugs maybe, and it's worked for them too. It's very strange. So I don't know what the effect would be. I suspect that there would still be a gap, although it might narrow. And before the Cepeda study, which was a meta-analysis of, I think it was 254 other rigorously done spaced repetition studies, found that the gap of improvement can be half a standard deviation or larger. But there are some cases where it's slightly smaller. And there are various factors that it depends on. Interestingly, the Cepeda study looked mostly at studies that were done before the advent of iPhones and Droids. So one of the things that I think is really promising about this is this technology is pretty cool if you go to your desktop computer in your computer lab every day and you're disciplined enough to use it. But I have students who will, on the subway, do their 5 minutes of cards a day. So the idea is that, you can do it on your iPhone or your iPad or your PC or Mac. I suspect, although again, it's a hypothesis only, it hasn't been tested yet, that will actually increase the gap just because it's always in your face. So if you want to lay in bed and do it, that's cool, you can do it. So we'll see. I'm going to test it and I'll give the answer. If it doesn't work, I'll shut it down. If it works, I'll tell the world. I think it's going to work.
Have you personally used the method to try to learn something besides law?
Yes.
Mind sharing?
No, yeah. Meine Deutsch ist besser. Yeah, my German improved. I took a year of it in high school, and I had grandparents who are long gone who spoke Yiddish, which was always a language that interested me. So I said, well, maybe if I improve my German, I can become conversant, I can do this. So, I've picked up a couple thousand extra words of German that I hadn't thought of in 25 years.
Wow, that's cool.
So it's the real deal. So actually, if you're interested in trying this out and not relearning law or learning law, there are a couple of good websites that really focus very strongly on language learning. Like Memrise is a really beautiful site, and I think it's totally wrong for law because one of the things they do is multiple choice, which really pretty strongly violates the precepts of the testing effect. Like memrise.com, and I love the guy, they're really nice guys. And they got a big grant and all that sort of stuff to write Memrise. But they have this wonderful, robust language learning thing. So if you just want to play with it in a context that's fun, like before a vacation, do it. Check it out. And it feels good. One of the things that the research actually also establishes is that users of spaced repetition don't always perceive how advantageous it is. and I call it sort of like the Rosetta Stone effect. So Rosetta Stone language learning technology is really fun. I don't know if people have ever done it. Scientifically, it's terrible. It's nonsense. It's gibberish. I mean, it's like one step above voodoo. But when you do it, it feels good to use it because you're learning phrases and parroting them back and you feel active. Spaced repetition works like gangbusters. But it just doesn't feel as exciting. So we try to do some things that make it feel a little more exciting. You know, we're adding a gamification element in, and you can give yourself points or whatever, you know, whatever sings to people. I don't know. But if you try it, I think what you'll find is that you learn.
That's cool.
You learn a lot. It's also fun to go back and, you know, you could learn the periodic table. You could learn, you know, I never learned all the conversions of everyday life, of like how many gallons are in a cup and all that sort of stuff. You can do anything. I mean, it works in all sorts of formats, all sorts of domains.
The amount, like, in other words, the amount of, like, say, for something like a language, you have to limit how many words or vocabulary, it doesn't fall off after you try and squeeze too much and then come back and learn that.
Yeah, the short answer is the algorithm should stay in place forever. So that means that as long as you respect the algorithm, you'll continue to learn.
I mean, like, say in one chunk of time.
Oh, yeah. So there's separate social science research and hard science research out there that says that, and this is scary, that our focused amount of concentration that we can put into any given topic is about 11 minutes. So the idea is that I want users not to work more than 11 minutes because I want them. And I want all of them when they're doing it. And when they're done, they're done. But I want them for that 11 minutes. So if you were a very disciplined person or were willing to go back and forth several times, you know, I think that would be the only effective limit. And of course, you still could learn. It would just, your rate of learning would slow. And we want to be efficient, right? It's silly if it's not efficient. This is an efficiency game.
Smaller chunks are better.
Smaller chunks are better.
Is spaced repetition, I was looking on the website, does it have an app, or do you just?
Oh, well, it's a web app. So what you can do is, like, if you want it on your iPad, you can click and make it a icon on your screen, and it'll pop up on your screen as an icon.
I thought you said you could use it on your iPhone. Same deal?
Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I use it on my iPhone every day. And my iPad and my computer. I can show you how after. It's easy.
Okay. What are you going to do when Barbary comes calling? Can you hold out?
I'm going to crush them. I mean, yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I'm not trying to get rich. I mean, I'm certainly happy to be rich. But,
they always have those tables with the student reps sitting there and the big piles of books, and you just think, oh.
Yeah, no, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want anything to do with it.
So how do we help our Barbary students with this? So
yeah,
those poor guys, you know, they already look like they've been hit on that crux, and July hasn't even gotten here yet. It's in the library. So how do we? They're already sitting in front of a lecture for what, half a day or whatever, and then they're watching the lecture again.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the perfect world, right, students would start this their first year of law school.
Okay.
Right. And they would do it along with their first year courses, and they'd shut off evidence, assuming they're not going to take evidence their first year, but leave it on for their other core courses. And if their professor likes some topic that's not heavily MBE tested and there are no flashcards for it, they can just add them in and study those too. And the idea is by the end of the first year, they won't have to worry so much about Barbary. You should still take Barbary. We're not a Barbary replacement. Alternatively, if a student wants to do it at the beginning of their third year or something like that, they can do it at a nice steady pace, 10 cards a day. Now is probably about the break-even time about whether it makes sense for someone to do it. Spacing effect can be profound at as short a time as a week, but, you know, I don't know. We're slightly over a month away from the bar exam, and I want students to pass the bar exam, and I don't want to make them guinea pigs. If a student today came to me and said, should I use this to help me? I would say, absolutely, do everything on the Barbary and spend 10 minutes of this a day. If a student starting law school came to me now and said, how should I use this? I'd say, start at the first day of law school, do a few cards a day, and they won't have to worry so much about Barbary. Okay, well, thank you guys. I appreciate your time and attention.
Yes, it's an extra difference.
We've got space.
See, that was, you don't know, and it's really useful because it's the same principle. It's not real math at all. Instead of doing a topic, stuff.
Oh, yeah, no, we only use
We'll just roll.
It rolls. So, but
What level?
that was what I call algebra 1. But I don't know what world they live in now, but that was like
I didn't cover that in high school.
No, I was sitting there thinking, no, but I memorized the quadratic formula wrong in algebra 2. I didn't, this would have helped me because I could have gone back and done it. For high school students, especially the efficiency. So I was curious, but and
so I have, my aspirational building is to get right here. Then I want to just really talk about high school educators. And my real interest in my real path, because the easiest application, and you have people are just application is straight line fast. Memorization of state capital. There's so robust to study. This will work. Whether it works as well as that, I don't know. It'll work.
But great for math. Yeah, I mean, because all the questions I have about, so what are we doing now? What are we doing? Legal education and all of that. But there are things. Just helps you. All those tricks, it helps you. And this is extremely for that. I mean, I think it's really useful for law. What you said about the bar review, I don't see why it wouldn't work for people who didn't do it in their law school classes, but just when they're starting out as they go through that 2-month period. It seems to me, because that's one of those common fears, just for fear adjustment alone, the number of people who will tell me 2 weeks before the bar exam, oh yeah, I knew all that common law property stuff, and I don't know it now. So
yeah, I think at the beginning of the summer's fine. As a complainer, it's like,
But and what we went to our law school, and ambivalent about it, but we're letting people take the bar in February the 3rd year. It's sort of experimental. And
what state?
Yeah, this is Arizona, University of Arizona.
Wow.
We got permission from the. See, I'm not sure about it.
Must really throw a ring on the 3rd year of law school.
Well, I mean, so we have this other curriculum, but part of the reason I was worried about it is because there is repetition that goes on with all of these in all the classes, and I'm just a big believer on that. It always gets reinforced, but I just don't want people to take that 3rd year bar. And we did okay. It was the first year we did it. So to have that as for a strategy, especially for these guys who were taking it a little prematurely, I just think that would be extremely useful.
Don't look it up.
Okay.
It's when the paywall goes up, $5 a month. I mean, it's not the idea here.
Well,
the idea here is expensive. What I want to do is just want
that stuff is horrible. I would love to be able to at least say, okay, rather than spending money on what I call the crack cocaine of steady age, which is case no briefs and all of that stuff. If you want to try something, I shove them into this for contracts as well. If you want to try something, try this. And I'll give them my standard thing about you're best off, I think, if you make up your own cards and testing and make them up related to my class and come talk to me if you want to do it so you can hear my blah 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 about there's no such thing as a right answer and all the rest of that. But I think that'd be useful, and I really think it'd be useful.
Well, if you want to try and experiment with your section, let's stay in touch and maybe we could I'm open to it.
Okay, so that's okay.
And then the other thing is, so what you could do is you could have your students all do it, and then you'd have like admin access. So that if, you know, as much, or if you wanted to do it virtually, or if you wanted to do it, you know, physically, you could vet their cards. And then what you have is, you have a group of students who have X number of contracts cards that they know, like, hey, I can rely on this. Professor said, this is within the range of reasonable.
Okay, I'll sit and think about that, because of this other thing that we've got going on, and actually it's gonna be a lot of law schools, is we